Welcome to Catholic Views. I'm your host, Renee Kranz. Today I have with me by Zoom Michael Pauley. He is the Executive Director of the South Dakota Catholic Conference. Welcome, Michael.
Great to be with you, Renee.
Yeah, we have to do it by Zoom because Michael is in Pierre right now.
Actually, full disclosure, I managed to escape from Pierre and now in Rapid City. So,
okay, well, you literally just left.
I just left. I was in Pierre most of the week.
Yeah, yeah. You've been there for a little while.
Yes, since January 10th, I believe, was the first day of session.
And do you just go during the week and then go home on the weekends, or what do you do?
I do, yeah. Typically, it's a 4-day week, so that there's a 3-day break, and that's really nice. That you get a little bit of time to rest and decompress.
Yeah, that's good that they do that for you and for all of our legislators as well.
That's right. That's right. You don't want laws being made by people who haven't slept recently.
Or seen their families or all of that stuff. So
exactly.
All right. Well, we wanted to have Michael on today to talk about this year's legislative session. Just get a little better idea of what does the South Dakota Catholic Conference do in Pierre while you're there. Because I think it's something that we should know about, and a lot of us do not. A lot of people don't know what the South Dakota Catholic Conference is. So,
certainly,
Michael, will you start with that? What is the South Dakota Catholic Conference, and what do you do in Pierre?
Sure. Well, the simplest way to express the mission of the South Dakota Catholic Conference is that it is the voice of the bishops of South Dakota on public policy matters. So, the church has a voice in the public square in the state, and the South Dakota Catholic Conference mission is to articulate that voice. My predecessor, Chris Motes, oftentimes explained that the Catholic Conference is the eyes, the ears, and occasionally the voice of the bishops on public policy matters. And I like that formulation because there is definitely, I guess I would just put it this way, that in this year's legislative session, there were 511 bills introduced. 511.
Oh, my gosh.
And yes, part of my job is to look at each and every one of those bills. Now, to be honest, I don't read them, from start to finish, but I at least pull up each and every bill. I look at the title and skim through it. With a view to just looking at are there any issues touched on in this bill that that possibly the Catholic bishops would be interested in taking a stand on, either in support of or in opposition to that. And so out of that 511 bills, I reduced it this session to what we call a watch list of about 61 bills.
Oh, wow.
And then among those 61 bills, the Catholic Conference formally weighed in on about 10 of them.
Right.
So it's kind of a winnowing down process.
Right.
And there's especially early in the session when the bills are being introduced fast and furious, an enormous amount of my time is actually spent reading and studying and just going through this filtering process of looking at the bills and figuring out, are there significant issues that the church might wish to express a view on?
Right.
So,
okay, so I'm going to use what maybe some people will consider a dirty word here for a second. And don't be scared. Are you basically considered a lobbyist?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So
very
then,
much so.
Okay. Mm-hmm. So then, as that type of role, when you're there, what are you doing with the legislators? I'm sure you're not just reading bills. So tell me about some of the things you do.
Certainly. Well, yeah, and maybe I can kind of help illustrate that by sort of describing what a typical day in the life of the legislature would look like. So typically, you've got to be up at 5:30, 6 o'clock a.m. To get ready for the first committee hearings, which, again, in a typical day, usually begin at 7:45 a.m. So you've got kind of round one of committee hearings on bills at 7:45 a.m., and then that usually goes till about 9:45, and then at 10 o'clock a.m., there's a second round of committees that meet, and they usually go till about 11:30, 11:45. So sort of 2 rounds of committee hearings in the morning. And it's very unpredictable. There will be some mornings where maybe only one bill that I'm interested in monitoring is up, and then there's other mornings where there may be 3 or 4 bills being simultaneously heard. And I haven't mastered the skill of bilocation yet, where I can be in multiple places. So it's oftentimes the case that I have to pick and choose which bills I'm going to be in the hearing. And then afterwards, I have to go back and listen to the recording of the hearing that I missed, to try to keep up to speed about what's going on. But
you need to channel your inner Padre Pio.
That's right. That's right. Yeah, he would have made a great lobbyist.
Probably he could both read souls and bilocate. That would be really terrifying as a lobbyist, wouldn't it?
Exactly.
All right, go ahead. Sorry.
So 2 rounds of committee hearings in the morning. Then there's a break for lunch. And then the Senate and House floor sessions on most days begin at 2:00 p.m., sometimes at 1:00 p.m., but typically at 2. And then those floor sessions can go anywhere from 1 hour to even as long as 3 or 4 hours, just depending upon how many bills are on the agenda, how packed things are, and so that pretty much takes you into the late afternoon or early evening. But then the work doesn't stop. In the evening, there are a whole series of things that happen. Most evenings, there's legislative receptions that are sponsored by various industry groups or special interest groups that just are holding hospitality receptions. The Bishop DeGrood actually did such a reception during a session. So we, the Catholic Church, had its own reception, and it's just an opportunity to invite legislators for hospitality, have a chance for one-on-one conversations about bills. And then the other important thing that happens in the evenings are what I would call informal strategy sessions, where different groups of allied lobbyists will meet with legislators that we're collaborating on, either to try to advance certain bills or maybe to stop other bills. And so, to be honest, some of the most important work that goes on in the Capitol during the session happens after 6 p.m. because that's when there's no official business on the calendar, and therefore people have time to kind of sit down and talk through the issues informally.
Yeah.
So typically it's a long day that starts at 7:45 a.m. and wraps up around 9 p.m.
Oh gosh!
And so the days are long and intense, which is why that 3-day weekend is really valuable.
Yeah, you've got to have some good stamina to keep up with that. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Okay, so in all this, of course, you're representing the church. Are you received well by the lawmakers, especially those who might not be Catholic or disagree with the church? How's that feeling to you there?
Yeah, well, it is hard to generalize because, there's 105 lawmakers if you add up both the membership of the House and the Senate. And although South Dakota is generally seen as being a conservative Republican state, the reality is that among that 105 lawmakers, you've got the entire ideological spectrum represented from left to right, and 1/3 of the entire legislature was brand new when this session started in January, meaning they were newly elected, had not served before. So out of the 105 legislators, quite candidly, there's a good number of them that I've got a close relationship with, and we're on a first name basis. And then there's other lawmakers that I haven't even met them.
Right.
I mean, so it really, you think about, I sometimes use the analogy of a teacher in school with a classroom of 25 or 30 students. How well is the teacher able to know each and every one of those 25 or 30 students? And the answer would be not very well at all on the first day of class, and then hopefully more and more as you're spending more time with those students. And so I've kind of got a class of 105 students, if you want to couch it that way. And it does take a long time to try to establish those personal relationships, especially, as I said, since 1/3 of them are completely brand new.
Yeah.
But getting back to your question, yeah, I think the Catholic Conference is very well received by the legislators that we're collaborating with on issues of mutual concern. So the legislators who are working to advance certain public policies that the Catholic Conference supports, or to oppose other policies that we think are not in the interest of the common good. I think those legislators really appreciate the Catholic Conference's involvement. Obviously, there's legislators who disagree with where the church is coming from on those issues, but I don't believe that in any case that the disagreements have become personal.
Good.
I think people just look at it and go, well, I don't agree with where the church is coming from on this issue, but the way that we approach it, again, I not to overquote my predecessor Chris Motes, but he sometimes says that our role in the Capitol is to be ambassadors of reason.
Oh yes,
and
another great one.
Yeah, I know. Chris Motes just, he has all those sound bites that I can't help but quote. But I take that to heart, that when we go in to either support a bill or oppose a bill, I try to keep emotions out of it and just bring, reasonable arguments that should be comprehensible by someone from any background or any faith tradition, or even no faith at all. So I think that I think it's fair to say that even among those legislators who disagree with us, I think that they respect that we are reasonable in our approach to the issues. Right.
Good. If you just joined us, we're talking to Michael Pauley. He's the executive director of the South Dakota Catholic Conference, talking about the legislative session that is just about to wrap up in Pierre this year. Okay, so Michael, how involved the Catholic Conference represents both dioceses in South Dakota, the Rapid City Diocese and Sioux Falls. So you have two bishops that you work with. How involved are the two bishops in what you do?
Yeah, they're very involved in every aspect of the Catholic Conference's work. For example, when I am in Pierre and I go and testify on a bill and I'm introducing myself, I always say I'm Michael Pauley, Executive Director of the Catholic Conference. And then almost all the time when I remember it is I add on to say that I explain that the Catholic Conference represents the bishops of South Dakota on public policy matters, because I want them to understand that I'm not in Pierre representing myself or my own interests. I don't take a position in favor of a bill or against a bill unless both Bishop Muich in the Diocese of Rapid City and Bishop DeGrood in Sioux Falls consent to it. And so during the session, the bishops and I typically will meet on a weekly basis, usually by Zoom, of course, since I'm in Pierre and Bishop Muich is in Rapid City and Bishop DeGrood's usually in Sioux Falls. And so we meet by Zoom. And as I mentioned before about the 511 bills, those meetings are where I kind of highlight to the bishops, here are the bills that might be of interest, to the church, where the church's prophetic voice perhaps needs to be heard. That's what we try to focus on. Or what are those bills where the church's voice needs to be heard? And my kind of touchstone for this is the Catholic Catechism of the Catholic Church, paragraph 2246. There's that line that's oft quoted that says, "It is part of the church's mission to pass moral judgments, even in matters related to politics, whenever the fundamental rights of man or the salvation of souls requires it." So whenever the fundamental rights of man or the salvation of souls requires it. And I really love that passage from the Catechism, because when I'm kind of sifting through this mound of 500 bills, it's a little bit like my filter for what I use to kind of say, okay, here's a bill that I think needs to be on our watch list because it implicates the fundamental rights of man. An example would be religious freedom,
Right.
anything that impinges on religious freedom, the right to life of human beings from the moment of conception to natural death. Those are certainly any issue like that concerns the fundamental rights of man. And then the other part of it is the salvation of souls. And so that's why, for example, the church will speak sometimes on issues related to gambling and
sure.
marijuana, because these things have real world implications for the way people live their lives. And so that's kind of the filter I use. And so I do make recommendations to the bishops. But I can assure you the bishops do not rubber stamp anything that I recommend to them. There's a very serious deliberative process that they go through, and so that process takes place on a weekly basis. And then between meetings, we're oftentimes communicating by email as well, because sometimes there are issues even during this legislative session that came up so quickly that it couldn't even wait until our next regularly scheduled meeting.
Right.
And we have to resolve things through an email discussion.
Right. That's really helpful to know. I mean, knowing Bishop DeGrood, somewhat at least, I'm not surprised that he wouldn't rubber stamp it, because, I mean, he wants to make sure that he knows what's going on. And I think that's really critical of a bishop.
Yeah, he's very thoughtful and very deep. And Bishop Mewich in Rapid City is very much the same way.
Good. Okay, we have about 5-ish minutes left. So can you pick from the bills that you have weighed in on with the bishops?
Sure.
Can you pick from those maybe the 2 or 3, whatever you think we have time for, that are the most critical that we should know about?
Sure. Well, yeah, I think what I'll do is just kind of focus on one bill that we supported and then 2 bills that we opposed. So a very crucial piece of legislation was House Bill 1080, and this bill concerned gender ideology. So the legislature considered a bill this year that would prohibit certain medical interventions done on minors for the purposes of altering the appearance of their gender. So the bill would prohibit medical pills like cross-sex hormones and puberty blockers, and also surgeries done on minors for the purpose of altering the appearance of their gender. And the obvious reason for this bill is that these medical interventions are radical. In many cases, they cause sterilization. Oftentimes, they cause permanent disfigurement. And as an example of that, during the hearings on the bill this year, we had 2 testifiers who were testifying in support of the bill. They were both young women who had double mastectomies, had their breasts, perfectly healthy breasts, removed because they suffered from gender dysphoria and they wanted to appear as if they were male, and then later on regretted it. But guess what? They can't get their breasts back. Right. And so the idea that we have minors who are too young to consent to marriage, too young to buy alcohol or tobacco, too young to vote, too young to do a whole bunch of things, but yet they're able to make a decision about having surgeries done on their bodies that are purely elective, that are producing irreversible results. That is really sad.
Yep.
So the good news is that bill was passed by both the House and the Senate.
Great.
And was signed into law by Governor Noem on February 13th.
Fantastic.
So very pleased with that outcome.
Yep.
And then examples of 2 bills that we opposed. There were 2 gambling bills in this session. One of them, House Joint Resolution 5006, would amend the Constitution to authorize mobile sports betting, where people can place bets on sports on their phones, which has been shown to be highly addictive. And then a similar bill concerning video lottery that would have doubled the amount of money that people could place in bets on each video lottery game. And so even though the church does not teach that games of chance are intrinsically evil, when you're talking about what I like to call sort of industrial level gambling, where it becomes an industry that preys on people's propensity to become addicted to these practices, then it does become a morally problematic thing.
Mm-hmm.
And both the video lottery and the mobile sports betting have been shown to be very addictive and to have some really adverse consequences. So the Catholic Conference did come out in opposition to both those bills, and happily they were both defeated.
Oh, great.
So those are just some examples of how the conference engaged in this session.
Yeah, that's really good stuff. Michael, can you direct people to the conference's website and where they can find, what kind of things can they find there, just in 30 seconds or so?
Absolutely. So the website of the South Dakota Catholic Conference is SD, as in South Dakota, sdcatholicconference.org. And there is a tab there that you can click on the 2023 legislative session, and you can look at all the bills that the conference supported and opposed during this session.
Yep.
And there is also a wealth of information
Yes.
on other issues as well.
Yeah, other big issues, some pro-life, right-to-life issues that are really big right now. I think people should go and check that out and really get familiar with them. Because they're going to be coming up. So
yeah.
Thank you so much for being with us today, Michael. I appreciate it. I'm glad you're back in Rapid City.
Thanks for having me.
Hopefully it's not a terrible storm out there. I know you got some snow, but
well. It's snowing and it's pretty. It's pretty when you don't have to drive
No,
anywhere.
I was going to say, listen, it's March. It's not pretty anymore, Michael.
That's right.
All right. Well, thanks a lot for being here.
Thanks so much, Renee.
You bet. If you want to know anything about what's happening in the diocese, you can always visit us at sfcatholic.org to see parish mass times. You can find your bishop's bulletin online there and all kinds of other things. That is it for us today. Hope you'll join us again next week for more Catholic Views.